The Messiah of the Bible is a key topic in both the Jewish and Christian worlds. But what if there was more than one Messiah? You've entered the world of things visible and invisible. David C. Mitchell is a biblical theologian and a musicologist. His academic qualifications include a PhD on the Hebrew Bible and a master's in biblical interpretation. He is a member of the Society for Old Testament Tanakh Studies. His writings center around the Messiah in the Hebrew Bible. His book, Messiah ben Joseph, is the first ever full-length study of a mysterious slain Messiah found in Rabbinic Judaism. And he joins me down the line from his home in Brussels. David, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
Hello, Sean. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
David, when I first came across your book and looked into it, I was rather surprised. Surely we all know who the Messiah was. Certainly the Christians do. And he came from Judea, and the Jews obviously rejected that and still do to this day. I mean, is there really much more to be said about messiahs?
Well, I guess there's a lot to be said about the Messiah because people have been saying it for 2,000 years and we are still talking a lot about it. And part of what is said most is the discourse between Christians and Jews on the nature of the Messiah, who the Messiah is, what the Messiah does, and whether the Messiah has come or not.
Okay, so, Messiah ben Joseph, is this a second Messiah that we're talking about here? I think I'm right in saying, David, that there were a lot of people claiming to be messiahs throughout biblical history or Jewish history. Is this just another sort of random Messiah that turns up in 1st century AD? Is that what we're talking about?
That's a very good question. Can we start with one question further back, which is this? We're talking here about rabbinic belief in the Messiah, not Christian belief, rabbinic belief. Christians believe that Jesus of Nazareth is the promised Messiah. The rabbis believe he was not. Now, when we talk about what the rabbis believe, they normally talk about a Messiah called Messiah ben David. That is the Messiah who is the son of David. And this is the one they talk about. Traditionally, this is the one they talk about today. But there is another Messiah in rabbinic literature, and he is one that they talk about a lot less. His name is Messiah ben Yosef, or Messiah ben Joseph. And the interesting thing about this Messiah is that he is a Galilean Messiah. He is a descendant of Joseph the Patriarch, that is Joseph with the coat of many colors. And this Galilean Messiah comes down from Galilee to Jerusalem, where he is pierced and killed by ruthless foes at the gate of Jerusalem. And when he dies, Israel are scattered among the nations, but his death confounds Satan and atones for sin and abolishes death itself. And then he is raised to life again. This is Messiah ben Joseph.
Well, if I can just stop you there, David, that sounds remarkably similar to another Messiah, Messiah ben David, no?
Well, it sounds remarkably similar to Jesus of Nazareth, actually. Now, the big question, the fact is that the rabbis don't talk about Messiah ben Yosef, and if we ask why this should be, well, we have to understand that the main issue that divides Jews and Christians is this question of whether or not the Messiah can die. The main reason why Jews will not recognize Jesus as the Messiah is because Jesus died, and he died a shameful death. Now, Jews accept that the Messiah may suffer, But the rabbis have always taught their people that the Messiah does not die. If Judaism were to accept the possibility of a dying Messiah, then the biggest Jewish objection to Jesus would just disappear, and Jews would start asking whether or not Jesus is the true Messiah.
Well, before we get into that, David, let's go back a little bit into your researches into Messiah ben Joseph, because some people watching this will be saying, "Well, where is this in the Bible? I don't remember any Messiah ben Joseph." Or somebody who's Jewish who would be watching it saying, well, "I've never heard of this." Which sources would you cite in support that there was, for example, a Messiah ben Joseph?
Well, there are two passages in particular. Let me begin by saying the name Messiah ben David does not occur in the Old Testament either.
Right.
So when we talk about Messiah ben David and Messiah ben Yosef, we're not going to find these names in the Old Testament. We get them from prophecies. Now, let me just bring up a few notes on this. Messiah ben Yosef first appears in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, and he appears in the 2 blessings in the Torah, and these are very important. One comes at the end of Genesis, and that is spoken by Jacob, and the one comes at the end of Deuteronomy, and that is spoken by Moses. And in each case, these 2 great leaders, Jacob and Moses, are blessing Joseph, the tribes of Joseph of the coat of many colors. And in Jacob's blessing in Genesis 49, Jacob first promises that Judah will have a hero, a savior to come. This is the Messiah ben David. And then in verse 24, he makes a promise to Joseph. And it's a big blessing. It's the longest of all Jacob's blessings. And he recounts how Joseph suffered at the hands of his enemies, and how Joseph suffered at the hands of his brothers, how these sufferings were like being pierced by arrows. And then Jacob says that Joseph overcame and he triumphed by the power of God. And then he says that from Shaddai, from God, there will come for Joseph a hero who will be called the Shepherd Rock of Israel. So this is a Messiah who is coming for Joseph, and he's coming from Shaddai, and this is a prophecy made by Jacob the patriarch to his son Joseph. So this is the first occurrence of a prophecy about Messiah ben Yosef.
And the other thing is, I'm right in thinking that Jacob is the father of Joseph, correct?
That's correct.
So was the blessing given to Joseph? Was Joseph still in existence at that point?
Yes, Joseph was still alive. Jacob's sons were gathered before him, and he put a blessing on each one of them.
Okay. So
some got bigger blessings than others, and Joseph got the biggest blessing of all.
The Christian understanding of the Old Testament, what they term the Old Testament, has there been a tradition of people identifying these passages within the scriptures as messianic prophecies?
Christians have been largely ignorant of this.
Right.
The rabbis have always known this, and they have always been aware of these prophecies, but Christians have been very largely ignorant.
Okay, we'll come back to that, David. So you would point people to these references in Genesis and Deuteronomy.
Genesis 49 and then Deuteronomy 33. Would you like me to say a little bit about Deuteronomy 33?
Yes, please.
This is a very important one.
Just set the context, David.
Well, this is now hundreds of years after Jacob and Joseph, but from each of the patriarchs of Israel, there are now tribes.
Right.
And so from Joseph, there are the tribes of Ephraim and the tribes of Manasseh. And Moses is blessing the tribes of Joseph.
Right.
And his blessing says, his firstborn ox, the word is a shor, his firstborn shor is his glory, and the horns of an aurochs are his horns. Now, this is an extremely compact prophecy. The first thing you have to understand is there are 2 distinct kinds of oxen. One is the shor, and the other is the rem in Hebrew, or the aurochs. Now, they're We don't know the difference. The aurochs has been extinct for 400 years. Um, Even in Israel, it was extinct in the time of Jesus. The last of them died in Poland 400 years ago. But the aurochs was a massive beast. It was a wild ox. It was as big as an elephant. It was black. It had horns that were up to 3 meters in the air. It was extremely fierce and extremely dangerous. And Moses compares the tribes of Joseph to two kinds of oxen. The first is the firstborn ox, that's the domestic ox. And in Israel, the firstborn ox had to die as a sacrifice. This was the law of Israel. Every firstborn ox has to die as a sacrifice. And then he says that Joseph will become an aurochs. So the prophecy says that Joseph will die like a firstborn ox, and then he will be transformed into this massive conquering beast that nobody can withstand.
Right.
And this is not just about Joseph, this is about Joseph's coming son.
So this is a prophetic text.
It's a prophetic text that a hero will come from Joseph who will die as a sacrifice like a firstborn ox, and then will rise again to become an all-conquering being that nobody can withstand.
Right. So just to recount on this, David, we've got Jacob talking about a coming shepherd king.
Shepherd rock.
Shepherd rock.
And a king, yes.
And a king. And then we've got Moses talking about a sacrificial victim, I guess, or he's using a metaphor to describe a sacrifice. Is that a correct reading of where we're up to so far?
A sacrificial victim who will die and then triumph.
Really?
Who will triumph after he dies.
Wow. Can you just cite the verse on that particular?
That is Deuteronomy 33:17.
Have you got it?
And it says his firstborn ox, his firstborn shore is his glory, and the horns of an aurochs are his horns.
Right.
Now the horns are the crown. The Latin word corona is linked with the Hebrew word keren, a crown. Horns are a crown.
Yeah.
The horns are the ox's crown. So the firstborn shore will die as a sacrifice, and he will be crowned with the horns of an aurochs. The dying ox will become a conquering king.
This, I mean, to my ears, this appears pretty clear, pointing towards a certain New Testament figure. But let's just move our way through what Christians term the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Are there any references in, say, the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, or in the Psalms even? Is there any references or prophecies about this mysterious Messiah ben Joseph figure?
There are many small hints. One of the best is in Zechariah chapter 12, where we meet a figure whom Zechariah calls a shepherd. So he is like Jacob's shepherd king. And in Zechariah, we meet this shepherd king, and he is betrayed to death by Judah, just as in Egypt, Judah betrayed his brother Joseph to death. And Joseph was sold to death as a slave. And in the same way, in Zechariah, this shepherd king is betrayed to death by Judah. And like Joseph, he is sold for pieces of silver. Like Joseph, he is mourned as a slain firstborn. And like Joseph, he is pierced through. The Zechariah shepherd king is pierced through and slain. And we find that he looks very much like Joseph, but he has got also features of David as well. Zechariah seems to be combining the prophecies to David and the prophecies to Joseph in one figure.
Now, just help us out a little bit as well about the land of Israel and the parceling out to the various tribes. Where was the tribe of Joseph? What area of land would they have been inhabiting?
Their political center was in the middle north of Jerusalem in the area of Samaria. That would be modern Nablus. And they also had land across on the east side of the Jordan. But their political center, where the tribe of Ephraim were, was in the Midlands of Israel.
So, I mean, the Messiah ben Joseph, was he technically a Galilean then in terms of geography?
Well, the rabbis call him a Galilean. That's not mentioned in the Bible. All we know is that Messiah ben Yosef is promised to Joseph, and therefore he could come from any of the area of Joseph. Now, Galilee was part of Joseph's area.
Was it?
Yeah. Why do the rabbis say he's Galilean? I think it comes from Isaiah, who says, land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. And I think the rabbis are taking this as a prophecy that a Messiah will arise in the land of Galilee.
So we have writings in the Torah. We have allusions in the prophets,
And in Isaiah and in the Psalms, yes.
in the Psalms as well. Whereabouts in the Psalms would you point people?
Well, the interesting thing about the Psalms is in the middle of the book. Well, let's start at the beginning. If we start at the beginning, we meet a man who is a righteous king, and he meditates on the Torah night and day.
Mm-hmm.
And the language of him is very like the language which describes Joseph, because he is a tree planted in dry ground. And if we go back to Jacob's prophecy in Genesis 49 that I spoke about, he describes Joseph as a tree growing out of dry ground. Because his life was hard, but he survived because his roots were in the living waters of faith in God. And so this man who opens the book of Psalms, it looks exactly like Joseph. He is a tree whose roots are planted deep in the underground springs. So this is we connect passages of the Bible up like this by means of the pictures which they use, the images. We can connect the images to one another almost like a jigsaw puzzle, and we can see this prophet is borrowing from this writer over here because they're borrowing the same images. So this person that opens Psalm 1 is a second Joseph. He's also a second Joshua, and Joshua was a son of Joseph. So in the same way that the Messiah from Judah is a son of David, in the same way the Messiah from Joseph is like a second Joshua.
Wow. So, so Joshua was from the tribe of Joseph.
That's right.
Right. Interesting.
Now there's a lot more in the Psalms. When you get to the middle of the Psalms, there's this great concentration of language all about Joseph, and then it just stops, and then we meet this conqueror coming from heaven to judge the earth. It's lots of little images and details. One of them is Psalm 92. There, the Messiah again is compared to a flourishing green tree. This is a Joseph picture. And he is compared to an aurochs. This is Deuteronomy 33. They're both there in Psalm 92. And he is anointed with fresh oil. That means he is a Messiah. Messiah means an anointed king. Well, I said that although Christians recognize that the Messiah is prophesied in the Old Testament, normally Christians see one Messiah.
Yeah.
But the Jewish view is more complex. They, in fact, see up to 4 messiahs. So a Messiah from Joseph, a Messiah from David, a priest Messiah, and a prophet Messiah. And the 2 most important ones are the Messiah from David and the Messiah from Joseph. And I was saying Christians are completely unaware of this, but these 2 messiahs are quite different. The Messiah from David is the one who comes to rule the world in justice. The Messiah from Joseph is one who comes to die for the sins of the world and to rise again. And then he works together with the Messiah from David in ruling the new world.
Are we talking, David, about multiple messiahs, or are we talking about different aspects of ultimately the same figure?
Oh, well, that's the question. That is absolutely the question. I think the Christian explanation is that all the messianic paradigms meet together in the one man, Jesus of Nazareth. He was a sacrificial Messiah, he is a king Messiah, he is a prophet, and he is a priest. But in rabbinic tradition, they're kept very separate.
Okay, well, let's look at that because, I mean, just for anybody who's tuned in, I mean, give us a brief outline of how rabbinic Judaism developed from the fall of the temple in 70 AD, and how Christianity, I mean, and presumably, I mean, Christianity ultimately began as a Jewish sect. So presumably, at one point, there were Jews who accepted the Messiah as they saw it, and there were other Jews who rejected it. Is that the kind of focal point for the start of this debate?
Even the word Jews is complex. We should really be talking about Israelites
Right.
because people from Galilee did not call themselves Jews. They were Galileans. They were Israelites. They were 100% Israelites, but they were not Jews. The people from Judah are the Jews.
Right.
So that's the people from Jerusalem and the area around about Jerusalem. That means descendants of Judah, descendants of the priestly tribe, and it also means very much the Pharisees and the Zadokites who ran the temple. These are what the New Testament means when it speaks of Jews. So I suppose the easier way to refer to them would be Judeans or Judahites, and then to refer to the people up north as Galileans.
Right.
The situation is when Jesus comes, the great majority of the Galileans follow him. And the Pharisees and the Zadokites, the Sadducees, the Zadokites, they reject him.
Right.
And when he rises, the great majority of Galilee soon becomes Christian. But much of Judea remains antagonistic. And then there's this terrible judgment falls up. I mean, but the church is growing, even in Jerusalem. We see this in the New Testament. There's a growing church in Jerusalem. But this terrible attack from Rome comes upon Jerusalem in AD 70. And the Christians leave the city because the prophets warn them that this is the time Jesus has spoken of. You must leave the city. They all leave the city. The Romans withdraw. The Christians leave the city. Then the Romans decide to come back. They besiege the city for several years, and there is this terrible, terrible slaughter, and the temple is burned. And of the Sadducees, of the Zadokites, almost nobody survives. And of the Pharisees, a few survive, and they move up to central Israel and they start their school there. And from that grows the whole rabbinic movement. This is the movement that we have recorded for us now in the Mishnah and the Talmud and all the associated rabbinic literature.
Well, just on that, David, I mean, the Talmud and the Mishnah, these are core documents for modern day Judaism. I mean, is there any references in these texts to the Messiah ben Joseph figure?
In the Mishnah, no. In the older text, still in the Targums, which are translations, Aramaic translations of the Bible, which are rabbinic translations, there are references to Messiah ben Yosef. And in the Talmud, there are 2 pages which have 3 important references to Messiah ben Yosef.
And what do they say about him?
Well, this appears in the Talmudic tractate called Sukkah, which is about the regulations for the Feast of Sukkot. And there's in Sukkah 52a, that's the first page, the question arises, why is Messiah ben Yosef slain? There is mourning, and the mourning, the rabbis, they're looking at Zechariah. I spoke about Zechariah and how Messiah ben Yosef is foretold there. And they're speaking about this mourning for this slain being in Zechariah. And the rabbis are disagreeing. One important rabbi is called Dosa ben Harkinas, is disagreeing with all the other rabbis. The other rabbis are all saying the people are mourning because the evil inclination is slain. Now, the evil inclination is the part of human nature that makes us do wrong. And they're saying their people are crying because the evil inclination is slain. But Rabbi Dosa ben Harkinas says, no, they're crying because Messiah ben Yosef is slain. And then the redactor of the Talmud, because the Talmud has been redacted by later hands, he agrees with Rabbi Dosa ben Harkinas. He says, why should people cry if the evil inclination is slain? They're crying because Messiah ben Yosef is slain. And now the very interesting thing about this is we have these two groups of rabbis, and they're saying Messiah ben Yosef is slain, and the other group are saying the evil inclination is slain. And they're not disagreeing with one another, but they're saying the people are crying for one or the other. In other words, they see in Zechariah chapter 12 two deaths. One death is the death of Messiah ben Yosef, and the other death is the death of the evil inclination. And these two deaths are linked. It is the death of Messiah ben Yosef which destroys the evil inclination, which is the human tendency to do wrong.
Which has a parallel, an echo with the Christian understanding.
Of course.
So what year are we talking about roughly when it was codified, the Talmud, David? Are we talking 3rd century, 4th century?
The Babylonian Talmud is codified about 450.
Right.
But this passage, when we talk about the Talmud, we have to talk about traditions within it, because these are written down oral teachings. And this teaching about Dosa ben Harkinas states from the time of Jesus, basically, because he's speaking when the temple is still standing. I feel, well, slightly after the time of Jesus. I have analyzed it in various places, and the conversation probably took place maybe a dozen years before the temple was destroyed. So perhaps around the mid-50s to late 50s in the 1st century AD. So it's an old tradition, and we have even older rabbinic traditions in the Targums. But this isn't a 4th century tradition. This is when the Talmud is put together. But the traditions within it are much older, because we can see from this conversation that this is taking place when the temple is still standing.
So how come, David, if that is the case, we're talking about a figure with great sort of lineage in terms of writing and an ancient prophecy. Why have we never heard of him? I mean, even mainstream Christianity or even in Judaism, nobody talks about Messiah ben Joseph. Why?
Well, the thing is that the existence of Messiah ben Yosef, well, let me just say Messiah ben Yosef is the greatest secret of Rabbinic Judaism. They do not like to talk about him. The rabbis like to keep Messiah ben Yosef on a strictly need-to-know basis. An example, in medieval Spain, the Catholic monarchs were trying to convert the Jews to Christianity. They wanted a Catholic kingdom. So there were a series of disputations between Christians and Jews. And the most famous was the disputation in Barcelona in 1263. And this was led by a Dominican friar called Pablo Cristiani, who was a convert from Judaism. He was a Jewish Christian. And Pablo Cristiani asks the world-famous rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, he asks Moshe to admit that the Messiah can die. Now, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman knew all about Messiah ben Yosef. He wrote about him in his own books, but he did not volunteer any information on that subject to Pablo Cristiani. He sensed that the friar did not know about Messiah ben Yosef, and he replied, "You will not find in any book whatsoever of the literature of Israel that Messiah ben David will die." And that, of course, was quite true. Messiah ben David does not die, but Messiah ben Yosef does. but Rabbi Moshe kept that under his hat. And he had to. All the rabbis for the last 2,000 years had to keep Messiah ben Yosef as a secret, because once they revealed that they believed that the Messiah must die, then everyone, Jew and Christian, would ask them why Jesus of Nazareth was not the Messiah. All the Jews all over the world might start asking if Jesus was the Messiah. So that is how Messiah ben Yosef became the best kept secret of the rabbis.
Well, just before we go a bit further, David, because am I right in thinking that in modern Judaism, when you hear talk of a Messiah figure, and obviously, unlike Christians, they're awaiting a Messiah, they talk about the Messiah figure as a sort of triumphant figure, a sort of glorious king who will come, world peace will follow, et cetera, that it's a moment when there isn't any more suffering, when there isn't any more problems for the children of Israel. Is this? I mean, that idea is quite current, talked about. Is that an erroneous idea around messiahship?
I think the big issue is that when the Jewish view of the Messiah is there will be no more trouble for Israel.
Right.
Not necessarily world peace.
Right.
There are many people in the Holy Land now who see Benjamin Netanyahu as a messianic figure. Some of them are claiming he's the Messiah. He's not a figure of world peace, but he is certainly doing what he can to do what he thinks is best for the Israeli state. So I think the Jewish concept of the Messiah is that the Messiah will bring domination. The Israelites will dominate the world when the Messiah comes. I think that would be the correct way to put it.
Okay. So it has no relation in modern Jewish rabbinic thought with this idea of a suffering, slain Messiah, which you've just talked about, a Messiah ben Joseph.
No.
Right.
The modern Jews are aware. The rabbis are beginning to talk about it.
Are they?
You will meet occasionally. You'll find podcasts on Jewish podcasts on Messiah ben Yosef. They still believe that a Jewish figure may arise who will suffer to bring in the conquering Messiah. And again, some people are saying that Benjamin Netanyahu is Messiah ben Yosef. So they interpret the words very differently from the way Christians do. For in Judaism, or let's say modern Israeli Judaism, there is another Judaism, which is a more spiritual Judaism and perhaps an older Judaism. And I think they do look for a Messiah who will bring peace to the world. That is certainly true. I shouldn't leave that out. There is an older and more spiritual Judaism which does see that, but modern Israeli Judaism is one that is seeking world domination for the Israeli state. And they're quite prepared to identify this as a messianic movement.
Right. If this is the best kept secret in Rabbinic Judaism and maybe even Christianity to some extent in the last 2,000 years,
I think Christians just didn't know about it.
Well, how did you find out about it?
Oh, well, that's interesting. I was researching my doctorate almost 35 years ago, and I came across a book by a 10th century rabbi called Saadia Gaon. And he talks in his book about the two messiahs coming at the end of this age. And he says, if Israel are not pure, Messiah ben Yosef will come first and die. And then after he has died, Messiah ben David will come to rule, and he will resurrect Messiah ben Yosef. I had never heard of this teaching. So I began to look into it, and I found that all the rabbis, all modern Jewish teachers were saying that this idea of Messiah ben Yosef arose after the time of Jesus in the late 1st or 2nd century AD. And most Christians who read up, the few Christians who read up on this subject just accepted the Jewish explanation. They said, yes, Messiah ben Yosef arose in the 1st or 2nd century. I could not believe this. It just didn't sit right. If the Pharisees, if the rabbis had rejected Jesus of Nazareth, why would they go and invent another Galilean Messiah who dies for the sins of the world and rises again? It just made no sense. So you see, the existence of Messiah ben Yosef poses a question that Rabbinic Judaism cannot answer. If the Israelites believed in a dying Galilean Messiah before the time of Jesus, then why didn't the rabbis accept Jesus when he came? Or on the other hand, if this idea arose after the time of Jesus, then why did the rabbis invent another Messiah so similar to the one they had just rejected? And so I investigated in this question in depth, and I published my findings in 2016. And as I said, the true origin of Messiah ben Yosef lies in the Old Testament, in Genesis and Deuteronomy, and in the prophets. And we mentioned this prophets and the Psalms, but then it appears in the 3rd, 4th, 3rd, 2nd century BC in texts like the Enoch Compendium and the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, the Sibylline Oracles, many others, and of course in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so the Israelites did know about this figure before he appeared. The Pharisees just did not want a Galilean Messiah.
Fascinating, David. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time together, and I feel as if we're just starting out on a quest, because I think you've posed as many questions as I have in your responses, and certainly got my mind wandering in different directions. David, tell people where they can find out more about you and where they can pick up a copy of Messiah ben Joseph.
Oh, Messiah ben Joseph's on Amazon. I hope you enjoy it. There's not much more to find out about me. I'm a very ordinary person. You'll get information about me on my Amazon author page.
Okay. For now, David, thank you very much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.